Netanyahu has actually threatened to carry out an Israeli attack, pretty much on their own. And he just might do that. He's made those threats in the past, and he hasn't, because they just don't have the capability. The attacks that they've launched, as we've seen, in spite of the claims that have been made, just don't achieve very much. But he might just go for broke, again, because of his very perilous situation within Israel. I mean, the anger against them is building, and then I saw polls that show that a large majority of Israelis are angry about what's the course that the country is taking with regard to Gaza. It's not because they're concerned about the Gazans, but they want the hostages back, and they know that by ripping up the ceasefire agreement and renewing the attack on Gaza, that it's made it much less likely that the hostages will ever return. So there's a great deal of anger. And then there are other things that we've talked about, the Qatar Gate and other scandals. So these are all swirling around Netanyahu. And he's been like a cat with nine lives. He always seems to survive. But you have to wonder, I mean, he's in a lot of trouble. And his way of getting out of trouble may be to start a war with Iran. He may figure that, again, if I go in there and get stuck, well, the Americans will have to come to my aid. And he might be right in that calculation. It's just like the Americans might not want to, again, for the reasons that we talked about. But it's going to be really hard to just let Israel, suffer a defeat at the hands of Iran. And so, the Israel lobby will go into overdrive to try to, get the U.S. to join him and help Israel out, get them out of the mess that they would have gotten themselves into. So again, that's one danger, right there. That's one danger to this agreement, is that maybe it'll be torpedoed by the Israelis by, through an attack. That could happen. Again,
do you think that's the biggest danger?
Well, I don't know if I would say that it's the biggest thing. I don't think it's likely. It's just, you just never know, again, because of the desperate situation that Netanyahu's in. He just might do that. I mean, it would be very reckless and, very risky on his part, but he just might do it because, he's looking at possibly the end of his career, jail time, all that. And then the failure to achieve his grand vision, which includes a defeat of Iran. So he just may say, this is the end. I only have in a few more months here. I got to do it now. He could do it. But maybe the greater danger is that it just might be torpedoed by, the Israeli extremists, the Zionists within the administration. And they are, there are many of them. I just thought back to, for example, the negotiations that began between Trump and Kim Jong-un. And that was torpedoed by Bolton. He found a way of making sure that wouldn't go forward. Now, I think that this time around, Trump has been more careful. I mean, he has chosen these diehard Zionists. There's no question about it, and anti-Iran war hawks. But I think he feels like he can control them. He's found people that he believes are personally loyal to him. But there is always the risk, because there will be pressure. There has been pressure within the administration to tear this up and to stop the not ceasefire, but treaty negotiations and start a real war. Those people are there, and who knows what they might be able to pull off some stunt and then we could be on the war track once again. But right now we're on the negotiation track, and there's reason to be hopeful, I think.
So these Zionists that are in Trump's administration, is their loyalty more to Netanyahu than it is to Trump? Or is it just to Israel, I guess? Or
Yeah. I'm sure some of them are personally loyal to Netanyahu. But it does appear that he has people that are more loyal to him. This time he was careful to find people that are loyal to him personally. So I think the odds are that he'll be able to fight off, any efforts to scuttle the negotiations from within his administration. But, those people are there. They've always been there, not just the administration, but within the permanent bureaucracy within within the Pentagon, within the Department of State.
Okay, well, I imagine Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby, they'll be doing everything they can to push it in his administration in the U.S. political system to get this war with Iran. And then will be the moment of truth is if he can't, what will he do? Will he try something, start some type of war, even though he knows he can't do it, just to let Israel get hit and then, throw up his hands and say, "America, come save me." I think that's
Uh-huh.
kind of the war path that we're
Yeah.
looking at, right?
Right.
So
Right.
if Israel was going to carry out an attack on Iran, how would they do it? Would they use submarines? Would they launch a missile? Do you think there's a chance they would use a so-called tactical nuclear weapon? I don't
Yeah.
understand how a nuke is ever tactical, but
Uh-huh.
well, what do you think
Yeah,
we
I
could be
think it's
looking at?
highly unlikely that they would use tactical nuclear weapons. I don't think Netanyahu would go that far at this point. I mean, you would know that the blowback from that would be huge. Um, but yeah, they do have submarines, and they could launch cruise missiles from within the Arabian Sea, for example. They do have long range missiles that they could fire from Israel. They do have their F-35s that apparently, like last time, they never actually flew into Iranian airspace, but they approached from Iraq and fired missiles. But those missiles those air launched missiles just don't carry very substantial payloads, and so they can destroy structures of various kinds, maybe a radar station, that sort of thing. But we're talking about, of course, the Iran's nuclear program, which is very well guarded and is generally deep within the ground. And I don't think any of those things could do any damage. I guess there's some facilities above ground, and again with these cruise missiles, maybe they could do some significant damage to some of those facilities, but they wouldn't be able to really set back the program significantly. They just don't have the means. But they might be able to, what we've seen Israel do in the past, and I think that's the best guide to what they might do in the future, is they've tried very, very hard to provoke a substantial response from Iran. So, again, we had the attack on the consulate, which was clearly an act of war, and that killed a lot of Iranian army officers. That, of course, occurred in Damascus, and then there was the assassination of Haniyeh there right on the day of the inauguration, and that was just clearly meant to, enrage the Iranians, and I'm sure it did. But again, the Iranians have shown the ability to, they understand the game that Israel is playing. Israel wants to bait them into some sort of major attack, and then Israel will throw up their hands and say, "Help! We're being attacked by the Iranians," and then the pressure within the U.S. to come to Israel's aid and launch a full-scale attack on Iran would be huge. And I think the Iranians understand that very, very clearly. So far they've gritted their teeth and have been careful not to respond in kind. We've seen those very carefully calculated responses in the past, and that's probably what we would see again. But it's a very dangerous game. Who knows? So when the Iranians might just feel like they just have to. If it turns out to be some sort of significant attack, maybe mass civilian casualties or something like that, they might feel like they do have to respond in a more significant fashion, and then who knows? That might just be the chance for Netanyahu to draw the U.S. into the fight.
You think that if Israel carried out an attack, let's say, just bombed Tehran and killed scores of civilians, then the Iran retaliated, that the U.S. would come to Israel's aid? I mean, it's just so
Well,
clear that
yeah.
we,
Well, that
you
doesn't.
know,
I mean, but that's been obvious all along. Like I'll give you an example. Like the attack on the consulate in Damascus. It was so obviously an act of war, but there was a lot. There was never an admission of that by the U.S. administration, and the same thing in the mainstream media. It was. I remember watching I think it was maybe Fox News at the time, and they just couldn't get them to say that they actually had attacked. They use this very convoluted language. It's like, the attack on the building, which Iran claims to have been a consular facility or something. Well, there's just no question that that's what it was, right? But they pretended it wasn't. And so yeah, I mean, America can lie on behalf of Israel. They do it all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, you bomb a nation's capital. I mean, what more of an act of war can you get than that, right? I mean, like that's I can. What are they going to spin? Oh, it was a
Yeah.
parallel universe, and it actually happened. Like,
Right. Yeah, well, I know that would be rather extreme, but I'm sure they're going to try to be a little bit more clever about it. That's just something I just came off the top of my head, and that's probably not the way they're going to go about it. But they are going to try to do what they've done. Again, we're not, this isn't just pure speculation. I think we can expect to see Israel continue to behave the way it has in the past under Netanyahu. And they will look for they will attempt some kind of provocation that will just push the Iranians over the edge. They'll go so far. Maybe, might be an assassination, maybe, who knows, a decapitation strike. That's another possibility.
it's just amazing that they can keep on getting away with it. That they can always play the victim despite all the
Yeah.
provocations. It's really impressive. You think that we've all heard the boy who cried wolf story. You think that would
Yeah.
happen eventually? Like, hey, this is not
Yeah.
what they're telling us.
Right. Well, right now, I wouldn't even call it's not any cleverness on the part of the Israelis. It's not, I don't think we have to say what they're doing is impressive. It's just that it's that slavish devotion to the Israeli cause within the United States. They don't even hide things anymore. It used to be that they were very good, like for we described the older Israel, that they had a big spin machine and they always managed to, when clearly they committed a war crime, they obfuscated it so that it became complicated back in the U.S. and whatever. But now they don't even try to hide things. We talked about the difference, like the first strike on a hospital in Gaza. Oh, they argued that and they spun that and whatever. It was just like there's all sorts of claims and counterclaims, and then people who aren't looking at it very closely, they just head spin and say, well, yeah, it's complicated. It was probably some mistake. It might have been Hamas or something, or Islamic Jihad. But now they just they strike these hospitals, and it's quite obviously deliberately. And they don't even make an effort really to hide it. But they know, they've learned from experience that it doesn't matter. Both the Europeans and the U.S. will cover for them. Now, there's occasionally an exception. There was the attack on the medical personnel. They actually, like the first responders, that was so egregious, and the evidence was actually just so overwhelming. The whole thing had been filmed that. And the IDF was caught in an open lie. That broke through. So occasionally, but that's really the exception. These things happen all the time, and 99 times out of 100, it just it's covered up. It's just ignored, and they've learned that. They've come to expect it. It's just like we can do what we want.
Yeah, that slavish devotion, it's really kind of sickening for me to see how it's kind of corrupted Christianity in this country. Because all that slavish devotion comes from the Protestant, the evangelical Christians
Yeah.
here. A lot of people that I grew up with. It's just, and that's a tough pill for people to swallow. These being these Christians, but you're supporting something that's so horrible, but you believe that this is God's plan. Because that's often what I see in the comments, when we post a video about what's happening. They say, this is, God's chosen people. This is their plan. And they've convinced a lot of people of that. And that's
Yeah.
just such a powerful force, and allows them to just be okay with the genocide, with these atrocities, with
Yeah.
the persecution of Christians
Right.
as well as Muslims in the land.
Right.
It's
No, it's very disturbing. I agree. It's a very serious corruption of Christianity, of the Christian faith. There's no question about it. But of course, it's not, Christian Zionism is just one of the legs that Zionism stands on. And
it's a
if you look
big leg, though. Ground
oh yeah, well,
support.
especially in the U.S. Yeah, no, it is. I agree. I'm not going to deny it. But if you go over to Europe, that Christian Zionism does not exist. That's just not a factor yet. These countries like Great Britain and France and whatever, they when it comes down to it, to actual substantive policy decisions, they're just as much on the Israeli side as the Americans are. and that's with the absence of Christian Zionism. But it just
Well,
makes it hard. It makes it, I guess, the difference I would say is that I think there's a real chance, there's a better chance that you would have a real revolution in, um, a complete change of direction in policy vis-a-vis Palestine and Israel in the European countries, because it is, I think, purely it's largely an elite phenomenon. And if you
right.
did get a different group of elites in there, okay, they don't have to, because they don't have a bunch of crazy Christian Zionists that are. Or instead, you do have an Israel lobby in places like France and England, which is pretty powerful. Not as powerful as the American, but it's powerful. But it's all up there at the top, you know. And so you could get somebody new in there who could really change things, and like in the case of, unfortunately, you just don't see the opposition parties that in those countries that are likely to actually win an election and change the policy. That's the problem. But looking further down the road, maybe such an opposition party will arise. All I can think of
Right.
is like Mélenchon in France, but unfortunately, like yeah, the right wing populist parties are pro Israel by and large within almost entirely within Europe.
Really.
Yeah,
Yeah. I feel like Christian Zionism gives the real ground support
yeah,
for Israel here in the United States, and that's where their a big part of their base is.
yeah.
What do you think it will do to them afterwards? After this is all over, the Gaza genocide it's irrefutable at some point. They can't look away. What do you think that'll do to Christians in this country? Or do you even want to tackle that question?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think we've tried to, and I admitted then that that's just it will be a wrenching experience, because again, we're not talking about a surface phenomenon. We're talking about a very deeply rooted phenomenon. The people that believe very sincerely in this, unfortunately, in this country, many people, and how they will respond, I don't know. It's just that a lot of them may just prove to be dead enders, that they will just shut it out, even if there's, I think you can already say there's quite a bit of
Mm, right.
irrefutable evidence, and they're denying it, and they will continue to deny it. And then, that's part of it. If it was just Christian Zionism, well, the elite could ignore them. Mostly the elite kind of looks down on those people anyway. It doesn't matter. But we also have a very, very powerful, the Israel lobby, which is largely Jewish. Some of that's religious, but a lot of it is secular. And and you have a lot of people, most of them, um, again, it's just within the establishment, and the establishment really gets to call the shots. Yeah, it's the combination of the two that makes it such a potent force within the United States more than any other country in the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that, like the off day, their policy position is, they support Israel. But I've seen polls that show that actually their base don't really share that. So they could switch. You could see that happening. But in the U.S., like again, unfortunately, with Trump and his people, their devotion to Israel is it's not something that they could just give up. And it's both the mega donors right at the top above them, Miriam Adelson, who's there, right behind Trump on inauguration day, right there, in the kind of the seat of honor, the $100 million donor, and many others like her. But then the base below, unfortunately, I mean, it's just something that he can't do. So it's going to be, again, going back to the Iran negotiations, it's going to be tough because there will be pressure. But maybe, like we've said, it's actually the fact that he has this reputation, a deserved reputation, a well-earned reputation, as a Zionist diehard, a diehard Zionist, right? That it may actually make it more possible for him to go through with these negotiations. Again, it's like Nixon going to China. It's just that, Nixon wasn't vulnerable to the accusation that he was a communist sympathizer because he had demonstrated over the years that he wasn't. So nobody really could say that with a straight face. And I think it's the same thing with Trump, that the fact that he has been such a diehard Zionist, maybe will let him go ahead with these negotiations and disregard the pressures that he is undoubtedly going to feel from these forces, both from the base and from the establishment.
We know Netanyahu doesn't want these negotiations to succeed, but do they want it to succeed, or is there a pretty split 50-50? I mean, this seems like would be a huge dividing line for people. People,
Yeah,
for all-out war with Iran. I mean, this is existential for them, right? So, I mean, surely that's got to have tensions really
yeah.
high in Israel, right?
Well, I haven't seen it actually, probably seen a poll, but I forget what the figures are. You would think that the opposition to war with Iran should be off the charts within Israel. For
Right.
somebody, because again, it's like Trump went ahead with this idea, and then like Pentagon officials pulled him over and say, "Hey, don't do this." And we're talking about U.S. power. Now, of course, for Israel, it's even. I think the question's even more obvious. Don't do it, and for all the reasons that we've talked about earlier. Um, but anyway, what was I just going to say? The yeah, the oh, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
That's all right. I forgot it too.
Yeah,
So,
it was just something. No, it was something. I think it was an important point. But okay, yeah, well, we're just talking about Trump being able to withstand the pressures. It's just that, I
just
think Trump, again, he's not crazy, and he was pulled over, or somebody pulled him aside and said, "Look, this is the way it is. This is going to be um, this is going to be the disastrous consequence if you go ahead with this." And
within Israel,
yeah, but yeah, but within Israel, that's what we're talking
right?
about. So you would think that that would be doubly and triply true within Israel, but they seem to be under the illusion, that they are the more powerful party. I mean, that's again, like I read a lot of these Haaretz articles. And Haaretz again is the left within Israel, which you would think would be the more the anti-war party, but they do seem to have this illusion of Israeli power and Israeli invulnerability. And, I haven't. I've read articles there that again this has a supreme confidence again. That we've eviscerated their air defenses and of course the nasty Iranians are always plotting against us. And if within the left, there's a debate, but it's an actual debate. But I wouldn't be surprised if overall, I may be wrong, but it isn't that the people in general are crying, insisting on no war for Iran. I think there is this feeling, this triumphalism within Israel now, after the attacks on Hezbollah, the decapitation strikes, and the pager episode, and all that, and then of course, just the massive bombardment of Gaza and then Syria. These all seem like great victories that just are telling these, reassuring them that they are the regional superpower and they have nothing to fear. So unfortunately, I think a lot of Israelis have this sense of invulnerability, which they shouldn't have because they're not at all invulnerable. They're very, very vulnerable.